Hello, sorry to keep you waiting. I think it was Kissinger, in fact, it was Kissinger who said, the absence of alternatives wonderfully clears the mind, and I was in a flight that wouldn't leave, so there was no alternative. And I think that's something you can say about NATO as well. The absence of alternatives wonderfully clears the mind, because right now there seems to be no alternative to NATO. And that's the topic of our discussion, not the alternatives to NATO, but domestic developments in NATO member states. And it's a pleasure to be here with such distinguished panelists and you all, and I hope we can make it an interactive session. So I would invite you to, the audience, to ask questions interspersed with the panelists' answers, so that we can fit in more questions and make it even more lively. Of course, there has been a rather significant domestic development recently in a certain NATO member state. So if you don't mind, I would like to start with that. Ambassador, I think on everybody's mind is the question how the attempted coup and the purge of thousands of military officers will impact Turkey's relationship with NATO.
Okay. What happened on July the 15th in Turkey was a coup attempt, although there were many hearsays about the nature of the coup attempt, but we know now, with all the information that we have in hand, that it was an attempt by a group which infiltrated a lot of government structures over almost 35 years. Since then, as you said, we have purged the military, we have purged the civil bureaucracy, universities, and many establishments which, in one way or another, help them financially. With regards NATO, we do not believe that what has taken place in Turkey has in any way diminished our commitment to NATO, and it has not diminished the readiness and also the force that the Turkish military has, not only within NATO, but also outside NATO in its own region. So I am against the views, and I don't really support the views that in one way or another Turkish military is, because of the developments in July 15th, its strength has diminished or it has been reduced. As you probably know, they are very much active both in Syria and also in Iraq. And we are carrying out our commitments with the coalition in both countries. So I would like to leave it at that by saying that there is no difference in terms of our commitment to NATO, and the second, we are still able to carry out our responsibilities as an ally in NATO.
Would either of you like to jump in, especially on the topic of NATO and NATO in the Middle East and the bases in Turkey?
Well, I mean, just to say the obvious, as an American, I find that very reassuring. The commitment remains firm, and that's a very good thing to hear. Obviously, there are a number of questions that people have looking at the dimension of the crackdown, and for that matter, at the broader question of the fate of civil liberties in Turkey, which is something that we all think about as well. But NATO is a security alliance. Its purpose is Article 5, which is to say that the attack on one country is an attack on all countries. Nothing has changed, I think, in terms of the American view of Turkey in that regard, and I'm glad to hear the same is true on the other side.
NATO is a security alliance, and as I was sitting on this plane contemplating the alternatives to my flight, I wouldn't leave. I was contemplating alternatives to NATO. Does anybody, just like your show of hands, does anybody here think that the EU is a credible alternative as a potential security alliance to NATO?
Good.
Because that's something that has been on the agenda recently, the potential of an EU army. But returning to NATO, if we can talk a little bit about the refugee crisis, which is obviously not a military crisis, but it has spilled into the security sphere. Maybe if we can start with you, Jamie, how do you think it has affected the cohesion in the alliance, and specifically the fact that, if you can comment on the fact that a number of European allies say the US should have done more, now we're left with the effects of US inaction in Syria, which is refugees at our doorstep.
I see it really affecting cohesion within European societies and countries, which on a more macro scale then affects the alliance. And to the extent that the onslaught of refugees has given birth, or actually not given birth, but has sort of exacerbated or popularized these far right, and in some cases far left extremist parties. And you're seeing this. I think this was a major reason for Brexit, even though Britain was under no obligation to take in any of these refugees because they're not in the Schengen zone. There was this sort of fear that was drummed up into people's heads that they would have to bring in Syrian refugees. So I think it played a large role in Brexit. We're seeing now a far-right populist party in Germany polling at about 15%, which is unheard of in the post-war Federal Republic. And I can go down the list of all these European countries that now have more popular right-wing, far-right parties largely because of the refugee crisis. And it goes without saying that these parties also happen to be anti-American, they're anti-EU, and they're pro-Russian. And so I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, but I do see a direct line from Russian involvement in Syria, bombing hospitals, bombing civilian targets, basically not fighting ISIS, but supporting the Assad regime, which is driving a wave of refugees into Europe, which then exacerbates populist tensions, which brings to power extreme political parties or fractures the consensus within these societies, and then leads to policies and governments that are more pro-Russian. So you can see a direct line from Russia's involvement in Syria to the changing political map in Europe.
Absolutely. Todd, would you like to?
Sure. I mostly agree with what Jamie said. I might add a few points. First of all, Syria, I think, illustrates the danger of inaction. When the Syria crisis began, it began as a crisis involving atrocities, and that's something that I've spent a lot of time doing some work on in terms of trying to figure out prevention strategies, both for my own government and working more cooperatively. I've got a report coming out from the U.S. Holocaust Museum shortly that'll address how we can improve our transatlantic efforts in atrocity prevention. Syria begins with atrocities. It begins when Assad opens fire on protesters who are demanding not his ouster, not his removal, but actually simply more political space for dissent and a more open, responsive Syrian government. And the response to this is not much. There's a half-hearted attempt to try to get something going at the United Nations. There's certainly a view among some of our European colleagues, France, UK, at the time, that more needs to be done. But we had the interesting problem of the Libya intervention also to take into consideration. And in here, even the Libya intervention was in some respects perfectly queued up. I mean, it had 2 Security Council resolutions, it had a referral to the International Criminal Court, it had the request of the regional organization, the Arab League, involved in it. It had a willing and able military alliance, namely NATO, that was willing to take the action that was required to protect, the opposition as the Gaddafi's tanks were rolling in. And so you had all those things. And unfortunately, it may have created the expectation that you can't do anything unless you do have the equivalent of all those things, which you never had in Syria. And I think that was a contributor to the paralysis. I also think that there was an expectation, certainly this was true in the UK, that the Assad government would fall quickly. This is the Arab Spring context a little bit as well. And so there was this idea that by doing nothing we could achieve our objectives. And what we now see 5-6 years later is that is just how dangerous the refusal to take these kinds of problems seriously at the earliest stages is. And regrettably, the options now are just not anywhere near as good as they might have been if we'd been willing to take more considered action earlier. And so it's a long answer, but I think it's an important answer. It's going to be very important to learn the lesson of Syria, as we must take preventive action sooner in order to prevent the next Syria.
And what will the next Syria be? Maybe
Well,
we can bring in Ambassador Yaram here. Do you
Well, I agree with both. First of all, I think we missed the bus when we did not do anything when Assad started his use of force against the demonstrators. During that time, I remember the Turkish foreign minister visiting Syria probably more than 6 or 7 times, trying to tell the Syrian government that this was not the way to go, and it would have serious consequences, not only for Syria, but also for the region itself, as the Arab Spring was developing. But unfortunately, he did not heed our advice. And because there is this tradition in Syria that if you attack with full force against any kind of dissent, you will be able to stop it or nip it at the bud. But this is exactly what turned the whole thing into a open warfare in Syria. And we know that there was a majority of the people who thought they were not part of the political decision making, mainly the Sunnis, and they had good relations with regional countries, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and also the Gulf. And one has to also keep in mind that there is this dichotomy, the Iranians on one side and Saudi Arabians on the other side. And this started to play a role also in Syria. And we have to also see the fact that we have drawn a red line, which was the red line became a pink line after a while. And I think we also have to give Putin credit. He saw an opportunity, he jumped in. And I think he, through what he has been doing since then, what the Russians have been doing since then, they have secured 2 bases, and probably a 3rd base is coming. And they have shown the world that Russia is an important country when it comes to solving problems, in quotation marks, around the world. I mean, I look at the outcome, because yes, more than 400,000 people have lost their lives. It is a tragedy. We could have done a lot of things, and we haven't been able to do. But the responsibility goes all around. I mean, it's not just the regional countries, but also countries in the P5, in the European Union. I remember last year Ms. Mogherini was here for a conference in Riga, and I looked at the whole speech. I listened to the whole speech. There was not one mention of Syria. So the European Union policy towards Syria was, I mean, let's keep it on the side. Hopefully it will, as you said, solve itself. So we are faced with a situation right now where the Syrian domestic problems have been internationalized, and there are parties on not only two sides, but probably 3 or 4 sides to the problem. And if we look at Russia and what they have been able to achieve so far, we can simply deduce that Assad is going to stay where he is. With all the blood in his hand, it will be very difficult to remove him with the support he is getting. We had thought that this was going to be a very long war of attrition, but when you use the full force of Air Force and using all types of bombs, I mean, not just battle bombs, incendiary bombs, but at the same time, bombs against the concrete structures. This is what we are seeing in Aleppo, and I think it is going to come to an end pretty soon. And unfortunately, this is the expectation of many leaders around the world. They are not very much concerned about what is going on in Aleppo. They are just waiting for this problem to solve itself as soon as possible.
With the destruction of the city.
Exactly. And the opposition giving up and leaving Aleppo.
Yeah. Can I just, I'm curious about which sort of countries are represented here. Is it mostly the Baltic states, or are there people from other countries? From all around? Okay. On this side? Okay, well. Okay. And do we have any questions at this point? Otherwise, we'll plunge ahead. And actually, if I could invite people from in the audience from the Baltic states and Poland, maybe to give your thoughts and also the panelists on how the planned NATO contingents in these 4 countries are already influencing or will influence domestic security perceptions, since we have been speaking quite a bit about Russia already. Anybody here from a Baltic state? Or okay. Do you think will you feel safer thanks to the NATO soldiers?
Hey, yeah. I think definitely it will improve security, and the most important issue is with the people who don't trust NATO. Unfortunately, we have quite a huge percentage of them in Latvia, and the hard task is to tell them, persuade, so that they believe that NATO will really improve the stability in this country. And but I think after some time it will happen, and the security will improve very significantly.
Okay. Anybody from Poland? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Hi, I'm actually from Estonia, and I work in the NATO Association. So our work is to talk about NATO values to our citizens. And actually, yesterday we received the information that the UK is sending 800 troops and tanks and drones and everything to Estonia. And well, we have this 2% what we have to fill, and actually it's going to be 2.18 next year. And in that sense, we have a consensus in society. There is no debate over it. But regarding the troops, actually, many people are asking us, is the war coming? And it's very, very hard to explain the idea. So just for you about the discussion, so maybe you can.
Oh, so you mean it's not contributing to a sense of security, but rather to
no, it depends.
Anxiety.
Yeah. It depends, but many people are thinking that the war is coming. That's why the troops are coming there. Why they wouldn't come there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's the opposite effect. Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
Bart Kołodziejczyk from Poland. I don't live in Poland, but I know what the situation is more or less. So I guess both government and Polish people, they believe that NATO is improving security. But I guess Polish people are scared that in case of war, Poland will be a battleground again. So this is, I think, the main issue for Polish people. They are scared that in case of war, this will be the main battleground.
As has been before. Maybe if I can ask the panelists to comment, especially on the idea that bringing NATO troops to member states actually causes alarm rather than reassurance, which is a bit concerning.
I don't know if it was Sun Tzu who said, if you want to prevent war, prepare for peace. I mean, it's basically a classic saying. And I also think when you're talking to people in your home countries, for instance, here I'm assuming you're talking about the Russian minority. Russia has never been invaded by NATO. It's never been threatened by NATO. NATO clearly has no territorial designs on Russia. The same can't really be said for Russia vis-a-vis its neighbors. There's a very long history, obviously, of Russia occupying, in some cases annexing its neighbors, and we've seen that in the past 8 years, obviously, beginning with the war in Georgia. I personally am not sure that the reassurance initiative is enough, if it's significant enough, at least when you talk to people in the Baltic states and Poland. They have to say something publicly, obviously, but when you talk to them in private, they give you a different answer. And I have to say I've been very disappointed in, or saddened really, when you look at some of the polls in European countries. They ask, would you defend a NATO ally from attack? And in Germany, the number is over 50% saying no. I believe in France and Italy, I think, is also over 50% saying no. In my country, we have a presidential candidate who openly says, repeatedly, that NATO is obsolete. He says that the United States will not respect its treaty commitments to its allies unless they pay up. He's not very clear about what he's talking about. He basically sees the world as a protection racket, very transactional. There's no concern whatsoever for values, community of values, or alliances. They mean nothing to him. It all has to do with, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. But it's not just America. I mean, the foreign minister of Germany this summer, when there were NATO exercises in Poland and the Baltic states, he referred to them as saber-rattling and warmongering, which is total Kremlin propaganda language to talk like that. And this is the Social Democratic foreign minister of Germany. And I think this, in particular in Germany, they're trying to use this as an election issue in the federal election in the next fall. I think that they sincerely believe that they might be able to attract, 5 or 6% of the vote, which is just enough to maybe, get them into the majority. Who knows? And they're willing to kind of play. They're willing to politicize what should be a non-political issue. So I'm not so sure when I look across the European continent, or even in my own country, frankly, that when it comes to NATO, our leaders don't fully understand what the purpose of the alliance is.
Yes, I thought I saw somebody from Germany. No? How do you agree with was it 57% in Germany?
It's over 50%, yeah, maybe 60% almost. Yeah.
Who are not so sure that
you mean
that allies should be defended?
Well, I can confirm there are a lot of people who don't want to. Well, there's quite a feeling that we shouldn't invest in military anymore in Germany. There's still, even in my generation, a lot of people who believe that it's better to let the NATO work it out without really investing in it. So I suppose as long as Germany's not at the border of where the things are happening,
yes,
people will be happy not to support a lot. But, well, I don't want to judge on my German fellows too much.
Thank you. Would you like to?
Well, sure. There was a time in the early 1980s when the United States determined to put Pershing missiles in Europe. And there were vast demonstrations, hundreds of thousands of people in the streets to protest this. And Chancellor Kohl in Germany at the time said something that I think was both on point and quite memorable. He said that Germany would be governed by the Bundestag and not the street. And I think Germany will be governed by the Bundestag and not opinion polls. I think the most important thing that we need to establish with regard to our neighbor to the east is deterrence. And I think these steps that have been taken are an indication that the alliance still regards its territorial defense mission with utmost seriousness. And therefore, it would be a terrible, terrible mistake for anyone to doubt that commitment based on transitory opinion polling. We do not yet have a crisis, and I hope we do not have a crisis. But I don't mind that populations around here are getting a little anxious. I think a little anxiety is appropriate. It's an appropriate response to a changed situation, and the changed situation is the behavior of the Kremlin. It's alarming. Populations should take that seriously. But I think it's important for political leaders to take a leadership role in explaining why deterrence is so important. And I think, by the way, that this couldn't, people my age, I used to be young and promising like you, now I'm, just much older.
And still promising.
Yeah. If we don't have, if we don't develop support in the next generation for a strong transatlantic alliance, then, we're going to have a lot more trouble.
Jamie, I think you and I grew up in the Cold War and are shaped by the ideological clash. And I think everybody in the audience is a bit younger.
I was 7. I was 6 when the Berlin Wall fell. So.
Okay, so you're you're less shaped.
Speak for yourself.
Okay, I'm older than you. But it seems to me that the difference is that the Cold War, well, Todd and Ambassador Yalav, you will remember it much more clearly than me, and Jamie, you don't remember it at all clearly.
I was precocious.
But the ideological clash that dominated, in essence, everyday life, and what we're seeing now is sort of tit for tat, where Russia does pokes a little bit, and then NATO has to respond. And I wonder if there is a risk that it creates a chain of events that we can't control anymore, where if Russia does A, NATO has to do B. And going back to domestic developments in NATO member states, maybe population, and the opinion polls that you talked about, maybe people aren't so excited about NATO, ordinary people aren't so excited about NATO engaging in what doesn't seem to be a necessary conflict. Maybe we can start with you, Ambassador.
Well, after serving in Germany 3 times. Let me start with Germany. I remember very well during the Gulf War, we had asked for NATO assistance. And it took the Germans, I think, close to 3 months to decide if they were going to contribute.
And all they did was write checks, right? They didn't.
Yes. I think the post-Second World War order is slowly changing. Not only with regards NATO, with regards the IMF, with regards the United Nations, with regards the World Bank. I mean, it was an order which was established in the economic sphere, the political sphere, the defense, and this is slowly coming to an end. And I think we have to come up with new ideas and new concepts, because the concepts of the Cold War are no longer valid. Yes, there are difficulties that we face with regards to Russia. Yes, we have difficulties with regards terrorist organizations. But the challenges that we have today are very different. We were thinking about nuclear warfare. I mean, the thresholds and all this going to a nuclear warfare. This is something that we I think, can, for the time being, push a little bit away, but look at the other types of challenges that we face. We're facing a propaganda war, with the old saying, or strategic communications, and I mean, there are so many concepts that people talk about. The second thing is a war which does not look like a war. We are also looking at how certain countries use the difficulties that other countries have to their advantage in terms of minorities, in terms of political instability, in terms of minorities in religion or political outlook. So I think we have to slowly change certain things. And that's one of the things that we have to also change in NATO. How do we defend ourselves against hybrid warfare? How do we defend ourselves against this, I want to call it propaganda war, in the sense that, I mean, everybody, you are bombarded with small sentences which is not true, but the moment you're trying to establish the truth, you have to spend at least half an hour to be able to work against it. So all of these, I think, is a very new tableau for us, and we have to look at it from different perspectives. The second thing is we have to look for new allies. Yes, we have partners of NATO, but the thing is, can we probably pull them in to become members? We have to think about these things, because the challenges that we are going to face is not going to be only Russia. We are going to be facing other challenges if we look at it from a wider perspective. And we are discussing NATO involvement in Afghanistan. Maybe we will be discussing other involvements, maybe somewhere in Southeast Asia. You never know. So we have to be in a position to sit down and discuss the challenges that we are going to face in the next 10, 20, 30 years. We have been concentrating only in Europe. But the real problems that Europe faces do not really come from Europe itself, but from outside. How do we answer to these challenges? How do we fight against these challenges? And going back to migration. Migration is going to be a difficult issue that we will face for the next 50 years. Because look at Africa. No hope. I mean, when you talk to the countries, people on the street in Africa, the only thing they are talking about is, how do I get to Italy? How do I get to Britain? How do I get to Sweden? And they already have some relatives, and this is a major challenge, I think, that we are going to face. And these people are from a different ethnic background, probably a different religious background. And for people in the Baltics, especially, or in Poland, they're not used to immigration from outside. I mean, when you look at Latvia, yes, there is a Russian minority, but the thing is, how many people do you have from the Middle East, or how many people do you have from Africa or from other parts? It's the same thing for Estonia. It's the same thing for Poland. It's the same thing for Czech Republic. I mean, these countries, it took a long time for Germany to get used to having people from other religions.
Turkey.
Yes, Turkey, but also nowadays they have, when you go on a Berlin street, you have blacks, you have Asians, you have Middle Eastern people, and this, I mean, it is becoming, yes, the Germans call it Entfremdung. In a sense, it is true to a certain extent. But the thing is, they are slowly getting used to a multicultural society. Multicultural society in quotation marks, because I want to, they have to adhere to the rules and regulations of the host country. This is what I mean when I say be open to multicultural society. Migration is going to be another problem because we have not been able to solve the differences in terms of income, in terms of social welfare between these. So, can NATO be shall we say, a pill which will have full effect against these ills? I'm not sure, and I think all of these we have to discuss because it is no longer, shall we say, Russia and the United States or China and the United. I think we have much more challenges, much different types of challenges, and I think we need more partners.
Before I go on to those partners, you have a very good point, and if I could test it out and try it out in an informal poll here, I think those of us who like to talk about NATO see Russia as the biggest threat to Europe today. But it could very well be that it's most people perceive it differently, and that they see the refugee crisis as the biggest problem, or the environment, or the ozone layer. So if I could just make a quick poll, who thinks that Russia is the biggest threat to their countries today? Okay. Well, you're a special category. Okay, so about 10 people. And who thinks the refugee crisis is the biggest threat to their countries today? In Europe, yeah.
To Europe.
Well, in that case, we should say Russia and Europe as well. Okay, so refugee crisis and Europe. Who thinks that the refugee? Okay.
Hi, I just wanted to comment the situation in Estonia about the refugee crisis in Russia. The government and everything, of course, understand that Russia is a threat, but actually the populist parties are doing, or party is doing quite a good job. So we had a survey, like a questionnaire.
Is this in Estonia?
What?
Which country are you talking about?
Estonia.
Estonia, yes. And there was a poll, and 64% of our population thought that the refugee crisis would be a bigger threat to our security than Russia, and actually that time there were none immigrants in Estonia. So the populist parties are doing like a really good job. We have a really good challenge.
Say something?
Can I just finish my very unscientific poll? Who thinks the refugee crisis is the biggest security threat right now in Europe?
For individual countries.
Europe, since that was the consensus. Okay, so about 15 people. And
Just to tie some of this together, I think during the Cold War, it was a West versus East crisis, and the ideological borders were very clear. You were on one side or the other, and you knew in your country, who was on the other side. If they were a member of the Communist Party, then they were on the other side, so to speak. Now, I think it's an East versus West, or I would say it's a West versus East, and some of the West. And that there are people in all these countries, and you could say the populists in Estonia, I'm not going to name names, but there are people in all these countries who are basically serving the purposes of the Kremlin. And it's sort of, I would say it's more of it's a war between liberals with a small L and illiberals. And it makes it much more difficult because we don't have a wall between us, and we don't, it's people on the left side of the spectrum and on the right side of the spectrum end up coming into agreement and sharing many of the same views or having the same purposes in supporting Kremlin narratives. And it makes our job much more difficult as writers, as diplomats, as people who observe this. It's much harder.
Yeah.
Questions as well?
Did you have Okay.
There's some people in the audience, I
Yeah.
think.
Let's start with the gentleman in the back.
Hi, I'm Rick from the Netherlands. We were tasked with a creative task for joining the Future Leader Forum, and I wrote an essay on the biggest threat to NATO. And I think we're missing a point here when we're asking I mean, it's if I ask you, you want tea or coffee, and I don't mention there's soda and beer and everything as well. We're not looking at the full spectrum here. What I wrote about in my essay is that I think one of the major issues we're facing is losing consensus among the population. We have a huge gap between, we've had this in the other panels, I think the first or second panel, we've spoken about the gap between the ruling elite, if you want to call it like this, Brussels being far away, as they say in the Netherlands, and the people on the street. In the second panel, somebody mentioned war among the people. I mean, of course, in Ukraine, we have a completely different situation. It's very extreme. But people in the Netherlands are very known for not being super active in politics. At least they talk a lot, but they don't really take action. And when we had the referendum of Ukraine, all of a sudden everyone was mobilized, and it created a lot of chaos. And one of the points I, of course, mentioned in the essay is about Brexit. And it's Nigel Farage said, we'll knock the first brick out. And everyone was like, oh, Nigel Farage. But he has a point there. I mean, not even looking at Russia or the migrant crisis. I'm based in Latvia, by the way. Not even looking at those two options. The population in general doesn't understand what's going on. I mean, we've had here comments about people getting nervous from soldiers being stationed here. I used to live somewhere close to the port area, and one night there was a huge military convoy with tanks and everything coming, and then all the neighbors came and asked me about it because apparently I know stuff about that. They were like, "What's going on? Was it Russian or was it NATO?" I said, "It's just a military drill. Don't you watch the news?" No. What do you do? And they're reading websites and they're reading Phoenix Fun. If people are from Latvia, they know what Phoenix Fun is. So I think that's a point we shouldn't ignore. I mean, because it's of course great that everyone here is gathered and everyone has done their homework and these things, but the people on the street, yeah, I agree. Of course, the Bundestag rules Germany, but the problem is the people on the street are in very high numbers. So I
and
think
they elect.
and they elect, exactly. And then we get the point of the populist parties. I mean, to look very far away, Iceland, for instance, currently the Pirate Party is the biggest in the polls. Yeah, this is a huge shift in politics there. Of course, it's only a country of, 300,000 people, but still, don't forget, Latvia has 2 million people. Yeah, that's also not very big. So I think that's one of the points we really should consider. Like, how do we reach the people? How do we communicate correctly? What exactly are we doing here? What's going on here? Or else we'll lose everything to popular opinion, like a certain candidate somebody didn't want to name in the US. It's going to be huge. So this is really, I think this is the biggest threat, the rupture from within. So maybe we can
The
later
gap
on.
between the establishment and
Yes.
and the population. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, my name is Nina. I'm from the States, but I am living in Kiev, Ukraine, and working with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs there. My question, and I'm a Polish American, I should say that, because this kind of informs where I'm coming from on this. And Ambassador, you touched on it. You did too as well, Jamie. I think NATO, of course, is primarily a defense structure. But I think many of the folks here would agree that in NATO accession was kind of a step toward democratizing, and certainly NATO is also a community of democracies. So what we're seeing in countries like Poland and Hungary and Turkey, what should NATO be doing about that? Is this the way that NATO should be adapting? Should there be any repercussions for backsliding that we're seeing across the member states? And I'm just interested to hear your views on that. Thank you.
So if we take this question and then answers, and then we can take the following 2 questions.
Hello, my name is Amish. I'm from Portugal. Since no one here mentioned the southern flank, I'm from Portugal, the country that wants to take more refugees, but nobody wants to stay there because they want to leave for the UK and for the Sweden. I guess
It's a beautiful country. I don't know why they don't want to go there.
The good weather is what it does.
It's wonderful.
I don't know. Money talks, you know. Yeah, even though people think that we are the lazy part of the Europe, we're not. We're not. Maybe if we are, it's St. Peter's fault. He gave us the good weather. And I also wanted to mention Kissinger, that we started with Kissinger, who once said that, who should I call when I have to talk to Europe, you know? So that is, I wanted to connect that with what you said. And we don't have actually a right-wing party. We don't have any populist party in Portugal. There isn't any, not even 1%. They don't get more than 1%. in Portugal. And Portugal is strategically, has a geopolitical important position. As you may know, in Azores, the base of Azores is considered to the United States. And no one talks about this. If we want to look for new allies, I think within the NATO we still have good allies like Portugal, which are not talked that much. That's one point. And I wanted to ask you, to the two gentlemen from the United States, as Americans, what do you think that this sentence of Kissinger means? Does it mean that Europe should go for a forward federalism, or should Europe is not taking care of their own home? What is the perception that America has for Europe? Is what Trump's saying really what American people think? That Europe, they're not good, they're not dealing well with the refugee crisis? This disdain for globalization and this disdain for Europe, how is it seen in America? And yes, that is all. Thank you.
So if we take the answers to these two questions first, who would like to?
I think, far be it from me to speak on behalf of Henry Kissinger, but I would assume that
Give it a try.
I would assume that he was probably referring to a sense that Europe is a collection of different countries with different interests, and they don't always agree on everything. And that was as true as when he said that 30 or 40 years ago, and I still think it's true today. Portugal is going to have different threat perceptions than Estonia. The Portuguese are not going to view Russia as much of a threat as Estonia will. Probably never. And that's just a fact of geography and history. That doesn't mean that you can't have solidarity and you can't come to agreement on important issues. And I think what we've learned throughout the past couple of years is that it's very important for Portuguese to try to think like Estonians sometimes, but also for Estonians to maybe think like Greeks sometimes and try to, be able to understand the challenges that all the 28 members of the EU, soon to be 27, I guess, that they all face. As for Trump, yeah, sorry, right. If it's a silver line, I wouldn't. The main reason that Americans, or 40%, however many, are going to vote for him, the main reason that they're supporting him I don't think has much to do with foreign policy. And that's sort of the one kind of silver lining to this, is that he says all these crazy, awful things about foreign policy and the way he views the world. And I don't think that that's why most people are showing up to his rallies. I think they're going there for other reasons, largely having to do with immigration or sort of identity, or basically that he's just a showman and he's entertaining. I think at the end of the day, Americans still support NATO. They still support America having a leadership role. Is there some more reluctance to be engaged in the world because of what's happened in Iraq and Afghanistan over the past 15 years? I do. I do think that there's a more isolationist sentiment is rising in the United States, but I don't think that that is what is ultimately driving the support for Trump.
I certainly didn't want to leave the impression that I'm at all optimistic about things, just by talking about the importance of responsible governance. We're, I think, at a point of multiple crises, and a lot of it is, I think, related to the kind of disconnection that people are feeling with regard to their governments. This is all very important, and it's by no means worked out yet. I would actually like to get the microphone back to our participant from Portugal, because you may have an answer to a question that I'm very interested in, which is why is there no right-wing nationalist populist party in Portugal? Can you?
Nor in Spain.
Yeah.
In Spain.
The first sentence, you as an American will not like it. We have a communist party, though. They do the job of the right-wing party.
Okay.
But I talked to someone yesterday. I don't remember with whom. Last year we had elections. The right-wing coalition won, 39% against 32% from the Socialist Party. But in numbers of MPs, the socialist leader did something that no one has ever done before after the revolution of 74. We had a dictator, Salazar, after that, which was he made a coalition with the left bloc and the Communist Party. So if you ask us, who's ruling your country? I would say, oh, well, our government is from Socialist Party. But who's really governing your country? Left bloc, communist, and socialist. So it's a weird thing because we're still pro-NATO. If you ask to a Portuguese, NATO is a reliable alliance. Yes, but again, if you are willing to help another ally, I'm not sure what will be the answer. But the right-wing parties, it's because of the Communist Party. They have been doing you understand what I'm saying, right?
Yes,
as a not catch-all party, but not as an elitist party, as a reactionary party. So
Yeah. No,
that's why they don't. Portugal they don't have a right-wing party.
That's quite interesting. I think it's important actually to delve into some of the details in these countries. We may learn some interesting things about the general character of public opinion. On the question of recriminations and for domestic developments in NATO member countries, I'm not going there. And the reason I'm not going to go there is because the security commitment is the most important thing about NATO. It is true that NATO came to be described, especially during the post-Cold War period and in the period of enlargement, as the military expression of a community of shared values, and I've certainly used that language myself. There's a lot of talk of Europe whole, free, and at peace, which also implied a kind of, I think, a democratic component to it. This may have been actual in the politics of all the members. It's certainly aspirational with regard to it. But NATO has been around since the Second World, since the Washington Treaty, and it was not always an alliance strictly of democratic countries, but it did serve its security purpose of deterring Russian aggression, and I think that's job one. Now, it doesn't mean anybody's getting a pass from me on these civil liberties and backsliding type issues, but I think they need to be pursued in other fora. And we have, I think, ways of making our views known on these matters. Those of us who continue to uphold what Jamie has rightly called the small L liberal tradition, and we should continue to do that.
Okay, go ahead.
Carmen Râșnoveanu, Institute for Political Studies, Romania. We are discussing, and we keep discussing about Russia as an aggressive country, all the problems that Russia is doing to Europe, to European security, but I think that, and we all agree that we cannot really have European stability without Russia, either we like or not. During the last Warsaw NATO summit, an important part of the discourse was that we need to keep an open door to Russia, to build a constructive dialogue with Russia. And in fact, the speech of the NATO Secretary General emphasizes this aspect. So I would ask you, how do you think, or based on which grounds, this kind of cooperation or re-engagement of Russia could be done, considering or taking into consideration that Russia will not give up at what it already achieved? I mean Crimea, I mean the increased enhanced military infrastructure on the western flank at the border of NATO, I mean the red lines concerning the Soviet space. So considering that Russia will not give up at these achievements, how this constructive dialogue, to quote the NATO Secretary General, will be built? Thank
Sorry,
you.
could you identify yourself as well?
I did. Carmen Râșnoveanu, Romania, Institute for Political Studies.
Thank you. And that was another question here. Yeah. And then you and you after that.
Okay, but
Oh, sorry.
thank you.
Okay, yeah, he was before you, and then we'll take one who was 2 and 3.
It's just
3. So, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, okay. Nico Segers from the Youth Atlantic Treaty Association in Brussels. I just want to echo what my colleague from the Netherlands just said. Brussels is not that far still. But there is a truth, though, that Brussels is being regarded as a sort of a bubble, and that the general audience and the lack of political interest play a role in the sense of distance to what's happening in the world. And I think populism and the movements of populism nowadays, they play a huge role in filling this kind of feeling lost in a political spectrum that's not theirs. I think so that there are processes of victimizations that are being exploited by certain leaders. And the sentiment of disenchantment and ongoing injustices that are being perceived and maybe exacerbated in the media, all that kind of mixture is leading to people becoming more apoliticized. Also, what I see very interesting is that there's a sheer lack of supply for actual, genuine, moral and charismatic leaders in Europe, especially. If you look at I've done some research on this.
Jan-Claude Juncker, you don't find him.
Looking at, for instance, Hollande and Merkel, how have they delivered to their audience? Yes, Merkel has shown the moral card, wir fassen das. But she felt that the popular, let's say, the popular movements were really going against that. Or look at Hungary, what the president has done there, going against what Brussels decides, and then he becomes sort of that kind of rogue who goes against the big decision makers who think they run Europe. Nevertheless, I think, and this might be a call to all of us. I mean, we are here. We were selected out of a pool of 500 people, for crying out loud. There is also a societal role for us to play, to be those stewards of change, I guess. And I think we shouldn't be too plain about thinking that we should take a societal role ourselves as young leaders. So this is an open call for all of us to take that moral responsibility in hand and help change the environment of apoliticization to more engaged citizenry. I think that's a moral duty we all have on our shoulders at the moment. And lastly, I didn't raise my hand actually on both the question, is it Russia or is it? I think, but it's just my opinion, that the financial sort of post-financial crisis recovery process is a structural problem underlying the rest. No money, no policy. So as long as we don't resolve the systemic problems in the post-2008 financial and economic institutions, and also put our money where our mouth is, etc., we want results for him. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, if we can tack these three questions onto your question there, and then I think we'll be able to finish in time for you to have a coffee before the next session. So you are first, and then you and you. Okay, a fourth question then, but make them quick if you can, please.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, did you have a question as well? Sorry? Sorry,
He also wants to speak.
Okay, all right, so 5 quick questions now.
Okay,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Thank you. Zhang Tianze from China. And I was living in Germany for a while. I am very curious, very interested in the refugee crisis problem. So when I asked most German, how do you think of the refugee? How do you think your responsibility? The most is the positive answer. They said we need to show our empathy, sympathy to those people because we live better than them. However, there is I think it's very serious phenomenon that the AfD, the party, and the right wing in Germany has growth. The supporting rate grows hugely in last year. It's around 16% in Germany, and I do not know whether this is a kind of indication. There also, I think, in many countries such as Greek, shares the similar problems. So I'd like to know, how do you think about this phenomenon? Do you think it is kind of an indication, and what do you think that in the future, or 1 or 2, 3 years, or 3 to 5 years, how will the refugee policy will be in NATO? How should it will do? So, thank you.
Okay, so refugee policy behind you.
Thanks for taking my question. Ahmet Vural from Turkey, and I have a question regarding the integrity of the EU and NATO, especially after Brexit. So, after the Brexit, there's a possible integrity issue in the EU. There might be several exits as well, like Grexit. So, do you think that either EU or NATO would be affected by this? So that's my question.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah. My name is Maida, and I'm representing Norway. So in light of the conversation which Mr. Trump has started, I think that it's important to emphasize that only 5 out of NATO's 28 countries are meeting the guidelines, which suggests that a country should pay 2% of their GDP. So I would like to invite you to comment on whether this is a legitimate issue and whether countries such as Canada, which are paying 1% of their GDP, and there are many more, of course, whether they should contribute more in an effort to strengthen NATO, and whether this is a potential solution, in quotation marks.
Thank you. And last but not least, oh, sorry, yeah. And then it's finally your turn in the back.
Thank you for the floor. I am Natalia Drost. I'm representing Ukraine, but I'm living in Poland. So, as I know, the last year, Polish government refused to accept refugees from different African countries. And the thing is that Polish population is decreasing, but Polish people are not open-minded to accept people from other countries. Even though this population is decreasing, they are more likely to accept people from Ukraine, refugees. So how can we cope with this problem? Because the population of Western European countries is increasing just because of the refugees, but Eastern Europe, even though the population is decreasing, they do not want refugees to their countries. How can we cope with this problem, with this issue? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, go ahead, finally.
So, Frank, I'm representing, I would say, Africans, the African Union, where I work as researcher, Peace and Security Department, but I'm from Cameroon. I think my question was actually the one where was just now asked, as how refugees, African refugees, precisely are perceived within the European Union. Well, I would definitely not agree with what Ambassador said about people in Africa thinking about Europe, all people in Africa thinking about going to Europe. I think it's not true. We all ask for peace. And I sincerely believe that most of the refugees who are trying to, just go to Italy and at risk of losing their lives, or basically because of the lack of peace, because they're just trying to save their lives, most of them. So I would definitely not agree that it's because we have a particular dream of just going to Europe for the reasons that just keeping our lives safe in a safer environment. So my question will be, maybe a comment will be, refugees are perceived differently according to where those Africans found themselves. A refugee from a particular francophone African country will be maybe better integrated in France, or where I come from, we speak German, I speak Portuguese. So I would definitely integrate myself easily in Portugal, in Spain, I speak Spanish as well, or English, but I wish I could speak Latvian, what's the language? Latvian, or Russian, Dutch, yeah. That will be a big challenge for me to know the language, to try to get the values of people, of societies, and try to integrate. But definitely, we ask for peace. We ask for, knowing to understand European societies, in spite of the fact that we had a very, strong history with Europe, bad history with Europe. But still, we're more interested in just living in a peaceful environment. But I definitely not consider refugees as a threat for European Union. I think Russia will, to me, be, something you should really consider than the Africans. We're just trying to live and struggle with life. So please do not consider ourselves as threats. And then finally, we hope, as the first session, during the first session, we hope that NATO might consider establishing a partnership with the African Union Peace and Security Department, especially, to try to address this issue at the root level. I had a discussion with the speaker of the first session. He said no, based to some legal constraints, NATO cannot support participating to the protection of those refugees trying to, using boats in risky situations in the Indian Sea or Mediterranean Sea, whatever, because they have, a different interest. But something we could also consider is for NATO to broaden the spectrum, trying to embrace more of these forthcoming institutions like the African Union, and we can partner together for common interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so this panelists, if you can summarize maybe in 60 seconds each, and you can choose between the refugee policy, is the Russian threat overblown, EU-NATO integrity, should we enforce the 2% defense spending benchmark, depopulation of Eastern Europe, how to solve it, are refugees or migrants, the answer how to integrate them, and the gentleman's question about more cooperation with between NATO and organizations such as the African Union. And then I think we have all deserved coffee for a couple of minutes.
First of all, to a response to the gentleman from Africa, when we look at the surveys taken in Italy, the main reason for becoming a refugee is economic. It's very interesting, but it's true. And when you look at the surveys, it is around 60 to 64%. We are talking, yes, and the second part is because of the threats to their lives in their own countries because of internal war or war between states in Africa. And that's what I wanted to put to your, for you to look at. The second thing is we can do more in Africa at the root of the problem than taking military measures in the Mediterranean Sea to stop them. I think it would be a much better idea to invest in Africa and to also solve problems between states or within states. If we can do that, if we can bring ourselves to that job in a successful manner, then we can solve some of the problems. There is going to be a migration no matter what we do, but we can take the numbers down a lot. Regarding the lady's question, and I think I had to also respond to that. I agree with you. The main idea in NATO is not sticking to the democratic ideals of that are enshrined, shall we say, in NATO, because the Americans have a different perception of democracy. We have a different perception. And the second thing, we do have certain, shall we say, lists where we check. Does this happen in a country? Okay, is this check. But at the end, it is the politicians who decide. And the politicians, as my colleague said, decide in accordance with the electorate. What do the electorate want? Unfortunately, we do not have statesmen anymore. We have politicians. And there is a big difference between politicians and statesmen, because the politicians in many countries around the world look at public opinion figures daily, and they respond to that, rather than looking at 10-year, 20-year programs. So I agree with you in a certain way, but don't agree on a certain way. This is going to be a difficulty for years to come.
Okay, Todd, which ones would you like to respond to?
Well, first of all, I do actually agree that we did not really have a good Russia policy in place in the post-Cold War environment. I think we made a lot of assumptions about rapid liberalization and that those were going to be frustrated. And I think to some degree we're paying a price for that now. So that's, but we, you know, as they say in politics, you have to begin where you are. You don't get to go back in time and see in retrospect that you could have handled something better. And that's, by the way, not to say that that I have any question, but that we did the right thing in reaching out to the Central and Eastern European new governments and helping them to integrate into transatlantic and Western institutions, NATO and the EU, first of all. I think that was a tremendous policy success, and it was accompanied, I think, by a little bit of a neglect with regard to what was a little bit farther east, and that's where we are now. On the other questions, you know, I think
2%, for example.
Sorry?
Should there be a penalty for those who don't spend 2%, for example?
Yeah. Well, penalty. See, Jamie's referred to this sort of transactional discussion. The Article 5 commitment is true regardless of how much people spend for defense. That's not negotiable. It's there. And the fact is we've been complaining for many, many decades about the inadequacy of burden-sharing arrangements and so forth. But two things are, I think, demonstrable. One, this issue has now been politicized. It is in American politics now. And you know, I was in Berlin last week and had a nice meeting at the MOD, and they were very emphatically making the point that Germany has changed its course on defense spending, that after years of decline, that's now going up. And they actually asked us to carry a message, which was that, you know, this was a turnaround, and it's real. Now, you can't ask for 2% right away because that's basically talking about doubling your defense budget overnight, and you don't know how to spend the money properly. That would be, in a way, a kind of wasteful solution. But I think there's an awareness that something has happened on our side of the Atlantic that's getting people to take this question more seriously. And the second thing I'd say is that Russian behavior has gotten worse, and I think an appropriate response to worsening behavior on your big neighbor to the east is to make sure that you've got sufficient military capability to deter aggression. That is the baseline requirement of Europe whole, free, and at peace. And so I think that it's appropriate for governments to be asking themselves whether they are doing enough, and given the recent changes in the environment.
Jamie, you get the last 60 seconds.
Russia, we should have a constructive relationship with them if they want to be constructive. They don't. They want to be destructive. And everything that they've done over the past couple of years, particularly since Crimea, demonstrates that. The latest example, they're interfering in our election, which is unprecedented. To see the Russian government doing what they're doing in the United States. I mean, our Ukrainian friends and our Baltic friends, you probably have some schadenfreude, because this is what they've been doing for years in your countries. But now they think that they can get away with it in our country, and it's really astounding. The question about the Alternative for Deutschland, this is not just about sort of right-wing populism. It's about the collapse of social democracy. It's about the collapse of the left in Europe. A lot of these voters who are voting for the AfD are former conservative voters. In Britain, a lot of people voting for UKIP are former Labour voters. In France, a lot of people voting for the National Front are former socialist voters. So it's not so easy that these are just, you know, these people don't fit the typical profile of a right-wing voter. They tend to be more working class. And on NATO spending, I think it's not just the amount of money that's spent, it's how it's spent. So one of the countries that spends 2% on defense is Greece. But it's a little deceptive because a lot of the money that Greece spends on its defense budget is to defend themselves against Turkey, their fellow NATO member. So you have to be careful. It's not just quantity, it's quality, I think, in terms of spending. And finally, as for refugees, there's a distinction, as my Turkish colleague said, there's a distinction between migrants, economic migrants, and refugees. The latter we absolutely have a moral human rights compulsion to care for. I really think that the former should be discouraged from coming to Europe, at least as Europe in some countries has 50% youth unemployment. We don't need more economic migrants in many European countries. If you want, and to prevent them from wanting to come, I would say that the EU should get rid of its common agricultural policy. It should have free trade with Africa. It should open up its markets to Africa, and that would help the economy grow.
Thank you. The next session is about to begin, so I'm sure you'll join me in giving these wonderful panelists a hand, and then we'll finally have coffee.
Thank you.
So, dear participants, literally 5-minute break. Take your coffees and teas with you, and I'm waiting you back in 5 minutes, okay? Thank you.